Memphis, Tennessee. Late at night, after the city had gone to sleep, a black limousine would pull up to the back entrance of St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. No cameras. No reporters. No announcements. Just Elvis Presley, slipping through a side door to spend hours with children who were dying. And for decades, almost nobody knew. Elvis made these visits dozens of times throughout the 1960s and 70s. He never told the press. He never used them for publicity. He explicitly told hospital staff not to notify anyone. Some of these children had weeks to live. Some had days. And Elvis would sit with them, sing to them, hold their hands, and make promises he'd never break. Recently uncovered hospital records and testimonies from families who were there reveal a side of Elvis Presley the world was never meant to see. And the reason he kept it secret will break your heart. If you lived in Memphis in the 1960s and 70s, you must have heard the name St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. Founded in 1962 by comedian and actor Danny Thomas, this hospital opened its doors to children battling cancer and life-threatening illnesses regardless of their family's financial situation. For that era, this was nearly revolutionary, and yes, it was a place that made your heart ache. Elvis Presley and Danny Thomas knew each other personally. Their paths had crossed in Hollywood circles. They had shared the same stages, sat at the same tables. When Danny told Elvis about St. Jude's mission and the children's stories, Elvis didn't simply make a donation and step aside. In ways most people don't know, he became directly involved in the process. His first visit was in 1964. Elvis personally called the hospital's director and said he wanted to visit some of the children, but not like a publicity event. No press, no photographers, just to spend time with the kids. The director was taken aback. Celebrities would occasionally come by, pose for a few photos, attend charity galas. But Elvis's request was different. He wanted to come at night, through the back entrance, and he specifically asked that the visit not leak outside the hospital. When asked, why so secretive, his answer was remarkably clear. If the media finds out, the story stops being about the children and becomes about me. And I'm not the one who matters here. To understand why Elvis made these secret visits, one must understand his relationship with death and illness. Elvis came into the world as a twin. His brother, Jesse Garin, was stillborn. Elvis survived. Jesse did not. This wasn't simply a detail in his life. It was an invisible shadow he carried within him. He would occasionally speak of Jesse to those closest to him. He would wonder, what kind of person would he have been? And yes, it is said that he felt the strange burden of being the one who lived. Then came 1958. His mother, Gladys, lost her life at just 46 years old. Officially, heart failure and liver complications. Elvis was serving in the military in Germany at the time. He returned home on emergency leave, but the person at that funeral wasn't merely a grieving son. It was as though a child whose entire world had collapsed stood there. Gladys was no ordinary mother to him. She was his safest harbor, his refuge. After losing her, those around him genuinely wondered whether Elvis would ever find his way back to who he had been. It is said that following this loss, Elvis developed an obsessive curiosity toward death and illness. He would read medical books. He would ask doctors detailed questions. He had a near-obsessive fascination with the human body, with fragility, with sudden loss. Because death was no theory in his life. It was a reality he had experienced far too early, and far too personally. And this is precisely where his sensitivity toward sick children comes in. In his worldview, children were pure and vulnerable. They should not have to carry life's heavy burdens. The belief that they don't deserve to suffer was, for him, almost a sacred conviction. Perhaps he was trying to do for other people's children what he could not do for Jesse, what he could not do for his mother. Who knows? After that first visit to St. Jude in 1964, Elvis began going regularly. Not according to any set schedule. He would call the hospital at odd hours, sometimes late at night, and ask whether he could stop by. The staff began to grow accustomed to this. A call would come in. "Elvis wants to visit tonight, around 11, through the back," and the staff would quietly begin to prepare. Elvis would arrive in everyday clothes, jeans, a jacket, sometimes sunglasses. Even after dark, he would spend anywhere from 2 to 6 hours at the hospital. The staff would guide him through different wards, oncology, cardiology, intensive care, and Elvis would go room to room. With some children, he would sing quiet versions of hymns, lullaby-like songs, his own songs if a child requested. With others, he would simply talk about Memphis, about music, things that didn't really matter, conversation just to make them feel normal for a little while. And with children too ill to talk, Elvis would simply sit beside them. He would hold their hands. He would make them feel that someone was there. Hospital records kept secret for decades, but partially shared with the public in the 2000s. With families, permission show that Elvis made at least 37 documented visits to St. Jude between 1964 and 1976. However, the staff believes the true number was far higher, because some visits were never logged. Elvis would arrive, the on-duty team would let him in, and Elvis would spend time with the children without any official record being made. Just Elvis and the sick children, in the darkness of the night, while the rest of the world slept. Those in Elvis's inner circle who knew about these visits asked him the same question repeatedly: "Why do you keep this secret?" In the 1970s, the press was mercilessly criticizing his weight, his health, his stage performances. Yet if a story like this had reached the public, his image could have changed overnight. A single headline would have been powerful enough to reverse the entire narrative. But Elvis held firm on the same point. He always said the same thing: "If people find out, this turns into a show." These children don't need a show. They need someone who genuinely cares. These words reveal his inner world. He was a man who understood the energy of applause intimately. He had experienced the thrill of the crowd, the power of the lights, the weight of the headlines, all of it. But there were certain moments that could not bear a stage, moments where one simply needed to remain human. His close friend and guitarist Charlie Hodge recounts a memory from years later. In 1972, after spending an entire night at St. Jude Children's Research Hospital, Elvis returns to Graceland just before dawn. "He came home at 5 in the morning," says Charlie. "His eyes were completely red. He had been crying." Charlie asks how the night went. Elvis pauses and says, "Charlie, tonight I met a 6-year-old girl. She's dying. She asked me if there's music in heaven. What do you say to that?" Charlie has no answer to give. Elvis continues, "I told her yes. I told her heaven is full of music, that she could sing as much as she wanted. She smiled. That's all I can do, Charlie. I can't save them, but I can make them smile." Elvis's hospital visits weren't only about time. He also donated significant sums of money to St. Jude and other children's hospitals. But he did so quietly. Anonymous donations. Checks written through his accountant with instructions that the source not be shared with the public. St. Jude's financial records show several large anonymous donations from the 1960s and 70s that staff later confirmed had come from Elvis. Some were designated for specific children, for families who could not afford their treatment costs. Others were general donations to the hospital's research programs. In 1973, Elvis donated $50,000 to St. Jude, equivalent to roughly $350,000 in today's money. The hospital wanted to name a wing in his honor. Elvis declined. "Use the money for the children," he said. "That's the only thing that matters." And here is something that continues to move people who learn of it. Elvis kept a box at Graceland. A shoebox, really. Inside were letters from the families of children he had visited. Thank you notes. Photographs. Drawings made for him by sick children. He never showed it to anyone. After his death, it was found in a corner of his bedroom closet. Dozens of letters, every one of them thanking Elvis for bringing a moment of joy to their short-lived children. And Elvis had kept them all. Every single one. Nurses and staff who worked at St. Jude during Elvis's years of visits shared their memories in various interviews over the years. And their accounts are remarkably consistent. Elvis was gentle, he was patient, he never rushed. He would spend however long a child needed, even if that meant staying until 3 or 4 in the morning. He never acted as though he was doing them a favor. He acted as though they were doing him a favor by allowing him to visit. One nurse said, "I worked with many celebrities who came through St. Jude. Most of them were wonderful people. But they came during the day, with cameras. They would spend 20 minutes, pose for photos, and leave. Elvis came at night, without cameras. And he would stay for hours. You could sense that he was getting something from being with those children, something he couldn't find anywhere else." Another nurse recalled, after Elvis left, he would ask about the children. He would call the hospital a few days later to ask how specific children were doing. If a child had passed away, you could hear it in his voice over the phone. He would grieve for children he had met only once. Elvis Presley passed away on August 16, 1977. His death made international headlines. Millions mourned. But in the children's wards of Memphis hospitals, that grief was far more personal. Because the children and families who had met Elvis during those secret visits knew something the rest of the world did not. Elvis was not simply a performing artist. He was someone who appeared in the darkest moments of people's lives and, without seeking recognition, without waiting for applause, brought light. In the years following Elvis's death, some families came forward. They shared their stories, and the world slowly began to learn about this hidden part of Elvis's life. The part that had nothing to do with being the king of rock and roll. Just a man who could not bear to see children suffer and who did everything he could to ease that suffering. If you remember Elvis Presley, you likely remember the costumes, the Las Vegas shows, the films, the scandals. But perhaps what you didn't know is this. In the quiet hours, when no one was watching, Elvis was visiting dying children, singing to them, holding their hands, making promises to families that he would pray for their children. And he never told anyone, because it was never about him. That is the measure of a person, isn't it? Not what they do when the cameras are on, what they do when no one is there, when there is no applause, no recognition, no reward, nothing except the feeling of knowing you made someone's pain a little easier to carry. Elvis Presley made at least 37 documented visits to St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. He likely made dozens more that were never recorded. He donated hundreds of thousands of dollars to children's hospitals. He sat beside dying children in the darkness of the night and sang them to sleep. And he did all of it in secret, because he believed that goodness did not need an audience. The king of rock and roll spent his nights visiting children who would never reach adulthood. And when those children closed their eyes for the last time, some of them did so remembering that Elvis Presley had held their hands and told them they mattered. This is not the Elvis in the history books, but it is the Elvis the nurses remember, the Elvis the families remember, the Elvis the surviving children remember. And now you know.